Hello. The Kelly and Victoria Fairy Stories, Volume 2. The Missing Sugarlump. If you should happen one day to go into a garden and look behind a hedge and spy under a bush next door to a daisy, and if you looked hard and were good and always brushed your teeth, then you might, just might, catch glimpse of our house, Victoria Fairy's house. It was a grey and cloudy spring day in Little Wedgwood. Victoria Fairy looked out at the gloomy weather and decided to put on her favourite television programme where several fairies competed for a record deal and learned to mime to backing tracks. She had just turned on the TV and settled down when the doorbell rang.
Oh no.
She sighed.
I've just got comfy.
Reluctantly, she went to the door, and there stood Kennedy, the mayor, looking very sad.
Mr. Mayor, what a surprise,
said Victoria Fairy. Hello, said Kennedy. I've just come around to ask your advice.
Really?
said Victoria Fairy.
What can I do for you?
I'm at my wit's end, said Kennedy, and with that he burst into tears.
You'd better come in and tell me all about it,
said Victoria Fairy kindly.
Let's have a cup of tea. They
sat down in Victoria Fairy's kitchen, and as the kettle boiled, Kennedy explained what was the matter. Well, you see, it's election day today, he said.
Oh, I'd forgotten,
said Victoria Fairy.
Don't worry, though. Now you've reminded me, I'll pop down and vote for you this afternoon.
Will you? Kennedy asked, with tear-filled eyes.
Of course,
she said. No, you won't, he wailed. No one will. And he burst into passionate sobs. When he had calmed down, he explained that usually on election day he and Havers would be up for election, but Havers just did it so he could make a speech. He liked making speeches, as he said it was good practice for plays. Usually he said what a great mayor Kennedy was, and that everyone should vote for him, and that's what everyone did, so he always won. But this year it's different. Kelly is running as well, sobbed Kennedy.
Oh, I see the problem,
said Victoria Fairy. And she could, because everyone knew that Havers didn't want to be mayor, so no one voted for him. But Kelly was different. Lots of people would vote for him because he might get upset otherwise.
This is a dilemma,
said Victoria Fairy. A nice dilemma, whimpered Kennedy.
I'll have to have a think about it,
said Victoria Fairy. Thank you. If you could, that would be kind. And he went off on his way, looking a tiny bit less miserable than he had earlier. Victoria Fairy had just sat down to think when the phone rang. Hello, it's Kelly on the phone, said the familiar voice.
Hello, Kelly,
said Victoria Fairy. Come round now, said Kelly, and he was gone.
He was even more abrupt than usual,
thought Victoria Fairy.
Something must be up.
And she set off for Kelly Manor. As she approached the huge front door of Kelly's house, Polo came out to meet her. Thank goodness you're here, he said. Kelly's in a terrible state. You better go in. As she went in, she saw Kelly running hither and thither. He was very upset. With Kelly in the hall was Stan, the police dog.
Hello, Stan,
said Victoria Fairy.
Hello, Kelly. Evening all,
said Stan with a wink.
At last,
said Kelly, giving Victoria Fairy a hug.
Something terrible has happened.
Well, I wanted to see you anyway and ask about the election,
said Victoria Fairy.
Never mind that,
cried Kelly.
This is much more serious.
It seems there might have been a burglary,
said Stan.
There was,
cried Kelly.
What's been stolen?
asked Victoria Fairy.
Not some of your antiques.
Worse than that,
said Kelly.
Not some of your silver.
asked Victoria Fairy.
Even worse,
sniffed Kelly.
Not a painting.
asked Victoria Fairy.
No,
wailed Kelly.
Even worse.
What then?
asked Victoria Fairy.
A sugar lump,
cried Kelly in anguish.
A sugar lump?
said Victoria Fairy.
Is that all?
Is that not enough?
said Kelly, clearly shocked by Victoria Fairy's question.
We are making inquiries even as we speak,
said Stan.
Seems a strange thing to take,
said Victoria Fairy.
Is it?
said Kelly, who was very fond of sugar lumps.
Where was it taken from?
asked Victoria Fairy.
In here,
said Stan, and he led them all into the basement where Kelly had his vault. The vault was a gigantic steel box with a huge thick metal door which had a big lock on it.
How could anyone get in there?
asked Victoria Fairy.
They shouldn't be able to,
said Kelly.
The vault has lasers and tripwires and loads of alarms that set off bells and sirens all over the house, but none have gone off.
Inside the vault, Kelly had all his sugar lumps stacked right up to the ceiling in a big square.
Shouldn't you keep your money in here?
asked Victoria Fairy.
Well, I would,
said Kelly.
but I haven't got room for it with all the sugar lumps.
Stan whispered in Victoria Fairy's ear.
Daft as a brush.
Look,
said Kelly.
you can see there's one missing.
Sure enough, there was a little square hole in the wall of sugar lumps where one lump was gone.
Who could have done this then?
asked Victoria Fairy. Well, we could just look at the... began Polo, but he was interrupted by Stan.
I'm now getting the prime suspects together,
he said, pulling out his notebook, and as he spoke, Havers came in.
Hello, everyone,
said Havers.
Hello, Havers.
said Victoria Fairy.
Mr. Havers, sir,
said Stan seriously.
could you tell us if you like sugar lumps?
Oh yes,
said Havers.
I'm rather partial to the odd one in a cup of tea.
And where were you last night between the hours of 6 and 9 o'clock?
asked Stan.
I was practicing in the theatre with some of my actors.
said Havers.
Oh well,
said Stan.
that rules you out then.
It might be him.
cried Kelly.
His eyes look a bit close together.
I say, old chap, steady on.
said Havers indignantly. Why don't we just look at... said Polo, but again he was interrupted by Stan.
Here's my next suspect.
He said as Mousie came in.
Hello, Mousie.
said Victoria Fairy.
Hello, everyone.
said Mousie.
Now, Mousie, sir,
Said Stan.
do you like sugar lumps?
Yes, and tea. With a slice of cake is nice.
Said Mousie.
And where were you between 6 and 9 of last night?
Asked Stan.
I was singing in Wedgwood Choir. It's our practice night.
Said Mousie.
Oh, well,
Said Stan disappointedly.
that rules you out.
It might be him. He looks a bit shifty.
Said Kelly.
What do you mean, Shifty?
Said Mousie crossly.
Of all the cheek?
Why don't we just look at? Said Polo again, but again he was interrupted.
Next suspect.
Shouted Stan, and in came Tiger.
Hello, Tiger.
Said Victoria Fairy. Hello, everyone. Said Tiger.
Mr. Tiger, sir,
Said Stan.
do you like sugar lumps?
Yes, I do rather.
And where were you last night between 6 and 9?
Asked Stan. I was up in a balloon with some tourists, I'm afraid. Said Tiger.
Oh dear.
Said Stan.
Then it wasn't you then.
No, dear fellow. Said Tiger.
He looks shady to me. Look at his eyes. Twitchy.
Cried Kelly. I'll have you know, there's nothing shady about me, and I do not have twitchy eyes. Said Tiger crossly. Look, said Polo. Why don't we just look? But again he was interrupted.
Next suspect.
Shouted Stan, and Wonky Donkey came in.
Hello, Wonky Donkey.
Said Victoria Fairy.
Hello, everyone.
Said Wonky Donkey.
Do you like sugar lumps?
Asked Stan.
No, not really.
Said Wonky Donkey.
Oh, so it wasn't you then?
Said Stan.
You can't trust anyone who doesn't like sugar lumps.
Said Kelly.
And look at those eyes.
I'm very trustworthy.
Said Wonky Donkey crossly.
And leave my eyes out of it.
Look, said Polo, who was getting fed up. Could we just look at the... But yet again he was interrupted.
Next suspect.
Shouted Stan.
That's you, Polo.
What? Said Polo.
Do you like sugar lumps?
Asked Stan. Yes, of course I do, answered Polo.
And where were you between the hours of 6 and 9?
Asked Stan. I was here, of course, said Polo, who was getting very cross.
Ah, you were here then, right?
Said Stan, who was getting excited.
Of course it was him.
Cried Kelly.
Look at those eyes.
Everyone went very quiet. Polo had growled, and you do not speak after a polar bear growls at you. You go very quiet, and you do not say another word about his eyes, and hope he's not too cross. We will now look at the video camera and see what it recorded last night, said Polo, finishing what he was trying to say for ages. That's if no one minds, he asked, daring anyone to mind. No one did. You should never anger a polar bear, however small. And so they all looked at the video the security camera had made last night.
Now we will have the scoundrel,
cried Kelly. The tape was rewound to the right footage from the night before. Imagine their surprise when they saw Kelly, fast asleep and sleepwalking, open the vault, turn off the alarms, and eat a sugar lump, then close the vault and go back to bed. They all looked at Kelly, who hid behind his hooves.
Eyes too close together, are they?
Said Havers, and he went off in a huff.
Looks shifty.
Said Mousie crossly, and he went off too.
Twitchy eyes. Shady.
Said Tiger hotly, and he followed the others.
Can't trust him, eh?
Said Wonky Donkey, and he left as well. Kelly looked very ashamed as Stan put away his notebook, muttering something about
Wasting police time.
and off he went, leaving just Victoria Fairy, Kelly and Polo.
I think you owe a lot of people an apology,
Said Victoria Fairy to Kelly.
and you'd better start with Polo.
Kelly looked very shamefaced.
Sorry, Polo.
I should think so too, said the little bear. But he never stayed angry with Kelly for long, so they were soon friends again.
But why are you sleepwalking, Kelly?
Asked Victoria Fairy.
I think I'm worried about being mayor,
Explained Kelly.
I don't really want a job. I just want to wear the costume and chain.
I see.
Said Victoria Fairy.
Well, I have an idea.
And so they all went down to the town square where the election speeches were being made in front of all the people. Havers was the first to speak, and he said what he always said every year, and everyone clapped at the end. Then Kelly went up and said what Victoria Fairy told him to say, which was,
I don't think I want to be mayor, so please vote for Kennedy, who after all is better than everyone else at it anyway.
Everyone cheered, and Kennedy smiled for the first time in ages. Then it was Kennedy's turn, but before he spoke, Victoria Fairy had a quick word with him, and he smiled and nodded at her. Then he said to everyone, Thank you all so much. This year, I'd like to propose that we have a deputy mayor who should have the robes and chain as well as the mayor, but doesn't do any of the work. Everyone thought this was a great idea, and they all shouted it should be Kelly, who was so touched he had to wipe away a tear with a handkerchief, though he said it was just some dust in his eye. Later that evening, as Victoria Fairy got ready for bed, the phone rang.
Hello, it's Kelly on the phone,
Said a voice.
Hello, Kelly.
Said Victoria Fairy.
It's been a right old day. I had to say sorry to lots of people, but it's all right now.
That's good.
Said Victoria Fairy.
It's time to go to bed, tucked in, no nightmares, and no sleepwalking.
Said Kelly, and he was gone.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Said Victoria Fairy. And that's what she did. Goodbye.